Good afternoon and welcome to our first official Rapporteur event. My name is Matthew Karnitschnig. I'm the editor-in-chief of Euractiv, and it's my great pleasure to have you here today because today is an important anniversary on many fronts. It's the one-year anniversary of this European Commission, which is something that we're going to be discussing pretty soon here. And it's also almost the 11th month anniversary of my tenure here at Euractiv. I started on January 2nd of this year, so I have another month to go. We'll see if they let me stay that long. But the real reason that we're here is to celebrate Rapporteur, which has become our flagship product, our morning newsletter, and that is really thanks to the two great reporters up on the stage here, Nicoletta, Ionta, and of course Eddy, who write it overnight and put it into your inboxes every morning. And we're going to be discussing that. We're going to be discussing some of the big issues that are roiling Brussels at the moment, and we're going to be taking your questions. But we're going to start the evening off with a presentation of some very interesting polling data from Polling Europe, and we have a couple of our partners here to guide you through this evening, and that would be Rado, Fonda, and Bruno, Jeanbart. I'm going to hand over to them. They're going to each do a brief presentation of this data, which will give us a jumping off point for the rest of the discussion. I also want to give a special welcome to the MEPs who are here this evening, and note that Euractiv is now fully accessible to everybody in the European Parliament, so don't be shy about reading us. You have a full subscription rights to the entire pro offering that we have. So without further ado, I will hand over to Rado and Bruno, and we'll be back with you shortly.
Thanks. Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. So now we are talking about European public opinion. We will see what Europeans think about the defense topic, which is very current in this period, and what they think about the United States and the relations between the EU and the United States, which is obviously very strictly connected to the topic of defense. Okay, first of all, the data that we will show you are taken from Polling Europe Euroscope, which is a bi-monthly survey performed all over Europe and based on a sample of 5,000 Europeans and spread through all the 27 member states. So let's go straight to the first part, which is regarding defense. There was much talk about the increasing of investments in defense in Europe, obviously, and it is interesting to see what people think about that. Well, a large majority, 73%, are supporting an increase of investments in defense, while 27% are opposing. But inside that 73%, we have to consider that there is 35% who would like this this growth of military expenditure to increase very strongly, while another 38% would prefer this increase to be very slight, not to spend too much on military. It is interesting to see that this share of Europeans who are backing the increase of investments in defense is quite stable in time. It was 74 19 months ago and is 73 now, so it's almost the same. But in September, we could notice that it started to decrease. It went down to 67%, while after that, it went up again to 73%, because in that period the intrusions of fighters and drones started in the air, in the EU airspace. Well, this backing of the defense investments are not the same all over Europe. From the geographical point of view, obviously we have a much stronger support to make these investments grow in Eastern Europe, obviously. We have more than 90% of people in the Eastern European countries that are willing, the EU countries, to increase military expenditure. But this share goes down, for example, to 60% only in Italy and in the Southern European countries. But there are differences also according to the political background of respondents. Here we see a breakdown according to what respondents voted in the last European elections. And you can see that the strongest support to the increase of defense investments are found among voters from Renew Europe, Popular Party, and also ECR. It is a little bit lower among Social Democrats and Greens, and also Patriots, while it is significantly lower among left voters and especially the very far-right ESN voters. Regarding the drones intrusions that we already quoted before, only 40% of Europeans think their own countries are able to stop these kind of intrusions, while the majority thinks they are not, or they are not sure that they could do it. So there is not a big trust in the capabilities of European countries to reject this kind of intrusions. And especially if we see the breakdown by countries, you see that, for example, in Poland, this trust is a little bit higher, reaches 50%, while it's much lower in Germany, Italy, and in general in Southern Europe. Now it's blocked, it doesn't go. Okay. Okay. Now this is about defense policies, the European Union defense policies. Most of Europeans are not satisfied with what EU is doing in terms of defense in this period. 53% thinks they are not effective, while 1 out of 3 is satisfied with EU defense policies. Again, we find that the most critical ones are Germans and Italians. In this case, also in general in Southern Europe, there is quite a large share of negative opinions, while in Poland they are a little bit more positive, but still even in Poland the negative opinions are prevailing. The last data in this first part is about frozen Russian assets. Nearly half of Europeans agree with the proposal to use these immobilized Russian assets to support Ukrainian defense and for reconstructions, while there is also 32% which is opposing this kind of proposal. And there are quite strong differences among different political areas. You can see that, for example, in this area of the so-called mainstream political area, like from Social Democrats, Greens, Renew Europe, and Popular Party, but somehow also ECR voters, the support for this use of Russian assets for Ukraine is quite strong, while it is completely the opposite in the far right. You see patriots, but especially among voters of ESN, when is strongly prevailing the opposition to this kind of proposal. Okay, so I give the word to Bruno now for the second part.
Thank you. We wanted also to show you some data about the troubled relationship between the EU and USA today. And the first thing that we just asked a question a few days ago about the image of the US among the European citizens. And you can see here that there's a tarnished image of the US today in Europe. Only 22% say that compared to 1 year ago, the image of the US has improved. 43% said it has worsened. So there's a kind of trouble in the European public opinion on the US today. But what is interesting here is when you look at the data on geographical areas, there are a huge difference on some part of the continent. You can see on the right side of the slide that on the new Europe, Central European and Eastern countries, it's balanced between 31% who said that it has improved and 30% it has worsened. If you look at the old Europe, Southern Europe or Northern Europe, countries like France, Germany, Spain, clearly Italy also, you have clearly a balance of a lot of people saying that it has worsened, 47% in France, 44% in Germany, 52% in Italy, 40% in Spain. So here we can see still the split between the two parts of Europe since the enlargement of 2004, which is really interesting on the US. The second thing we wanted to see here is what are probably one of the roots of it is the a trade deal with the US. We ask people how they judge finally the trade agreement between Europe and the US, and there's clearly a critical look at it on the European public opinion. 37% only said it was positive, 50% said it was negative, and here also there is a huge split between the Central and European Eastern countries. 49% said it was positive, 42% in that part of Europe said it was negative. But when you look at other countries, there's also big splits. Clearly, France is one of the most critical on it. Not surprising on trade affairs. It has always been the case on many issues. If we look, we had some questions in the past about Mercosur, for example, and we had the same thing in the data. 17% only said it was positive in France. 67% it was negative. But even in countries like Germany, where, for example, in France, we say that the agreement is made for the German. Only 39% of the Germans are seeing it as positive, 51% as negative. Same in Italy, same in Spain. Poland is, as you see here, a bit different with 53% of positive image of the agreement. So one of the question and the issues in the relationship between the Europe and the US today is this question of the deal. We show you also a question that we asked at the beginning of the year, in January, when after Trump said that he wanted to take back Greenland in the US. And we asked people what they wanted to do for the Europe on that. You can see here, there's a divided Europe on this kind of issues. 41% said we want Europe to react strongly and want Trump to stop threatening. But at the opposite, 28% say don't react, it's just provocation, and 15% don't react, Greenland is not important for the EU. So here also it's interesting to see that there are some divisions. But the divisions here, sorry, I don't have the slide, but oops. No. Yeah, it's just, no. Sorry for that. Maybe it's that one. Yeah. Here, the division is not about geographical area mainly, but it's much more, when you look at the data, about political positioning of the citizen of the EU. If you look at people who voted for political parties, which are now in European groups from the left to the EPP, we had around 50% or more saying that we have to react strongly against this Trump attack. If you look at people who voted for radical right populist parties, it's 30% or less who say we have to react strongly against Trump. So clearly the positioning here is much more political than geographical, and it's interesting to notice also. And the last thing I wanted to show you is about this data, which shows that in any case, the Europeans, they are aware that there's a need for Europe to be independent on technological issues regarding the US. We have this question, and 68% say the EU should invest many resources in technology in order to become independent from the USA. 68%. Here, what is interesting is that there's a kind of consensus in Europe regarding geographical area, regarding also political division and the kind of voters you are. And it shows that here there's a kind of consensus, and probably it's interesting for the EU to know that and to notice that and to say that and to think that on this thing, the citizens are waiting a lot from the EU and in the next years on this kind of issues, which is not always the case, as you have seen. Sometimes there are some divisions still in the country, in the continent, but here you have a kind of consensus agreement on the European side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruno. Thank you, Rado, as well. That gives us a lot to chew over here. And I think we want to maybe start right there, because it seems to me there's a direct correlation between the relationship with the United States, or Europeans' views of the United States and its influence, and their willingness to spend on defense and on technology and these types of things. And there have been some pretty important programs over the last year that have been put forth by the Commission, including the SAFE program on defense. But I guess the question is, Eddy, is this really going to be enough? Is this the kind of sea change that Europe really needs? Because I think in the popular mind, maybe, it's good to spend a little bit more, as long as it doesn't mean that countries are going to have to spend less on social welfare and these types of things. So when the rubber really hits the road, we're talking about now within NATO 5% of GDP. That's something that a lot of countries, Spain, for example, isn't willing to pay. I mean, what is sort of the discussion in the Commission about these popular realities?
It feels like everything. There we go. That the microphone is working. It feels like a lot of the Commission's agenda in the first year was kind of was reactive. It was reactive to Trump. There's no better proof of that than the fact that many of the same people who are making the decisions now were the people who made the decisions in the last 5 years, during which we had none of this emphasis on defense, we had none of this emphasis on tech sovereignty or sovereignty, as some people pronounce it, even I'm starting to pronounce it like that. And this idea of decoupling or de-risking, whichever one you want to call it, from the US was kind of anathema. We were in like the warm bath of the Biden administration. Things had gone back to normal after the first Trump administration, and suddenly there was this wake-up call, to coin another phrase. And so I think a lot of it has been reactive, and I think there's a sense, especially when you talk to former commissioners, some of them were already pretty outspoken, while they were in office, but people like Thierry Breton have been very outspoken constantly on television, giving their opinions about how things should be going and how things would be going better if they were still in office, Borrell, for example. But the reality is, I think that ultimately, if you really sat these people down, von der Leyen down, and you got her to be honest with you, they would probably admit, or they'd probably have to admit, that they missed a trick and that they were too slow in the last 5 years. They probably banked on Trump not coming back into office. I'm sure they hoped he wouldn't come back into office. But now it's it's too late almost. So it's all about catching up. It's all about making use of lost time. Whether it's about these massive safe loans, which I think are actually a success from the first year. The rest of the evening will be me criticizing the Commission. So at least to say one nice thing about it, that was kind of remarkable how quickly, and obviously it's not just the Commission, but how quickly the European institutions did agree on those massive safe loans. Now we're seeing they're coming into trouble with the UK and who else can kind of get involved. But in terms of the EU, that was a success. And on all sorts of other areas now. I mean, the whole omnibus agenda that I'm sure we'll go into as well is completely, it's largely, I would say, about showing and showcasing to the US very strongly, waving a sort of omnibus flag to the Trump administration to say, hey, look how much we're friendlier we're making it for your businesses here. Okay, it's going to help European businesses as well, but it's almost like that's a secondary thing. And I mean, you can go into any area, even migration, which really doesn't affect the US at all. I mean, why should they care about who's coming from North Africa to Southern Europe? I mean, it really doesn't concern them at all. But again, it's being used as a sort of communications strategy. And the real question is, not only why it takes so long to get to this point where we're being more independent on tag, we're being more independent on defense, which seems obvious now, but it's also, will it work? And are they doing enough? And I think those are big open questions that are not answered by their first year in office, but maybe will become more apparent in the next few months.
Well, we'll come back to the omnibus because I think that's a very important point. And it does seem like during this first year, the Commission has spent most of its time re-engineering what the first von der Leyen Commission did and undoing much of that agenda. Eddy mentioned migration, which is an area that you've looked very closely at, Nicoletta, and it is the defining issue across Europe for the far right in particular. It's the reason, really, that the far right has become as strong as it has. There's a new migration commissioner, an Austrian named Bruno, Magnus Bruno. How is he doing? You spoke to him last week. What are your impressions of how that is progressing?
Well, one thing that he mentioned last week is that when we look at migration policy, there was a complete shift. And I do agree with him, because in the past year, the Commission proposed many files. I mean, they're still under negotiation, so we're not talking about concrete laws. But I mean, we had the return, so we talked about it quite a bit this year, which is basically this plan. It's also called, many people call it this deportation legislation that member states really pushed forward and really wanted the Commission to present a new system, because this idea that, I mean, of course, the political landscape and the EU governments changed a lot. We have more center-right and far-right governments in Europe that are asking the Commission to put forward more harsh migration laws. And
this would be the migration hubs, for
exactly.
example.
For example, we had this proposal in March, which is this return regulation that put forward the idea of return hubs, which is something that member states were asking about it. And now the crazy thing is that there is really not much disagreement over it. Everyone agrees that this is the way to go, and
Describe briefly how these hubs would work.
Basically, we're talking about just offshore facilities for migrants that have had a rejected application in Europe, and the Commission is basically saying, okay, we should send these people with rejected applications outside Europe for them to be returned to their home country or any other country in which they could find a safe place. And now that it's under discussion, and everyone seems to agree that this is the direction to take. And then one thing that the Commissioner said last week, which I found really interesting, is that in the past, let's say in 2024, also when the new Pact on Migration was agreed, everyone everyone was concerned about some harsher parts of this pact. But now everyone agrees, and from 8 member states agreeing on this harsher direction of migration, now we have 20 member states, and this is what he said. And we have been seeing it also at the leaders level. Every single European leaders meeting, just the UCO meetings, more than 16 member states meet in the morning to hash out some details, to align on positions to take when it comes to migration. So we definitely saw this very let's say, a right-way shift when it
Everyone
comes
agrees
to
with Orban now. Orban was right all
That's
along.
very interesting, because I remember last year, it was October in Strasbourg, and Orban was present to present some of the priorities for the Hungarian presidency. He said specifically, everyone will agree with me on migration. And now thinking about it, I was like, maybe that was really the case and no one could see that in that moment. But now we have, of course, the return regulation. We have these two files also, which are under negotiation, which is safe country of origin list and the safe country concept, the review of the concept, which are totally changing how the EU handles migration, which is, yeah, it's as he said last week in Strasbourg, it's a total shift, and I have to say it's true.
So Bruno comes from a center-right government in Austria that actually took a very hard line on migration under Sebastian Kurz, the former chancellor, also went into coalition with the far right. We're seeing a more cozy relationship, let's say, between the center-right, the EPP in Europe, and the far right. How do you think this is going to play out, Eddy, in the coming months? Are we going to see open collaboration? Because, as Nicoletta says, there are these political realities that countries are dealing with. Right now, the AfD in Germany, in many polls, is leading the center-right, is the leading party. I think in Austria, the Freedom Party, which is the far-right party, is now almost at 40%, just under 40%. And we're seeing this across Europe. They're resurgent. Obviously, in your home country, Maloney is running the show. Where do you think this is headed in the coming months, and what does it mean for the way that Brussels is going to work?
Well, I mean, the most recent big election, I suppose, was in the Netherlands, and I was there. I picked correctly, very luckily. Thanks to one person in this room, I win a prize. No, but I mean, it was good that Rapporteur was able to report from the scene at the D66 winning election party, and that was interpreted. That's a sort of centre-ish liberal party. We won't get into the exact names, the labels for it, but essentially it was interpreted. They just about managed to beat Wilders by very only a few thousand votes, I think, ultimately. And that was interpreted as this is a guy, Rob Jetten, who knows how to win. This is a comeback for liberalism. But in some ways, I think it bucks the trend that we're seeing around Europe, and it might be a bit of an outlier, because especially when you look at Brussels. I mean, Brussels has not. Of course, the Dutch governments famously take many months to form. So maybe we haven't seen the full impact of it yet. We haven't got a new Dutch Prime Minister coming to the European Council yet. So they're kind of still in stasis. And I think that the Netherlands will come roaring back, wanting to engage more with Brussels and have a less adversarial approach. So that's only one country. I mean, if you take the whole panoply of 27 member states and the whole European Parliament here in Brussels, I mean, I think the pretense that kind of was in place after the European election, which was that, or the sort of falsehood actually, that but which was the mainstream takeaway, if you read the sort of European press, was that the centre held. Well, the centre held to a certain extent, but actually there is a right to far right majority now in the European Parliament, which now a year in, because it's also it's not actually the 1 year anniversary of the Parliament, but it's sort of 18 months in. Any pretense that this was a kind of that the centre right didn't want to openly collaborate with the far right is kind of dropping away. I mean, it's kind of the boiled frog analogy. We don't really see it because there's another Strasbourg session and we've all got our noses right on the ground looking at the details. But ultimately, the EPP are allowing, as they put it, the far right to happen to back their amendments. Or the far right happens to put down similar amendments to the EPP, forcing them to, vote, sort of encouraging them to vote the same way. I mean, a lot of people saw the omnibus, the first kind of simplification package on the due diligence legislation, as a kind of watershed moment. But it's happening on many other smaller things, on sort of non-binding reports that are sort of proposed by some far right MEP who no one really takes seriously, but now is getting endorsements for their reports. And I think if it keeps going in this direction, you have to start asking questions like we are in the newsroom. Like, okay, like let's look at the scaffolding of Europe. Let's look at more the civil service, the administration. These 50,000 people who work in Brussels. I mean, a lot of these are civil service jobs nominally, but they're also highly political positions. The higher up the ladder you get. And are these positions going to be, starting to be populated, maybe in drips and drabs, 1 or 2 people here and there, by Orban's people, by, who knows, maybe one day Marine Le Pen's people? And if that starts to happen, I mean, because all institutions are made out of people, ultimately, does that make us, this is taking it, very far, but you asked me to like kind of imagine the future. Does that lead to sort of, a different European Union, a far-right European Union?
Mega in Europe.
Yeah, mega.
European.
Is what they're talking about. Nicoletta, you spend a lot of time in the parliament talking to people. I've read somewhere that the cordon sanitaire is basically dead now after this last collaboration. Is that what people generally think behind the scenes? Are they saying that, look, we've crossed a Rubicon here?
I think, as Eddy mentioned, there was this vote in omnibus. We have seen it also at the lowest level, like, I don't know, appointment of rapporteurs, amendments, just reports that no one cares about. Maybe we do because we're so deep into the European how the European Parliament works. But yeah, this is what people have been saying all along in the past year. We've been seeing EPP siding with the far right, with ECR. At the beginning, it was mostly at the delegation level. They would say, okay, we can only collaborate with the Belgians, we can collaborate with the Italians, and then we draw the line here and there. But then in the end, like we've been seeing in all these votes, and then also last week in Strasbourg, there was this deforestation law vote in which we have seen the same thing happening all over again. And these are all votes that are quite meaningful, because when we look at the deforestation law, which is something that we at the newsroom level, we've been reporting quite a bit on this, and this piece of like the green legislation that has been negotiated for a long time, and is part of this Green Deal project that we're trying to re-engineer right now, and we've been also with the omnibus and stuff. So it's definitely something that is happening, and it's more clear and concrete now, because everyone is realizing that this is happening on bigger votes and not just at the at the lower level.
And also, I mean, one of the big takeaways, I think, if we're like casting our eyes back, but also thinking about what could crop up, which could really land a serious blow against the Commission. Of course, we've had 3 no confidence votes in the Commission in the space of a year, which is kind of extraordinary. I've been in Brussels since 2018, and I've never seen anything like this. There was talk that it was going to become like a snowball effect, and it was, and it did become a bit ridiculous as well, especially because the last 2 were sort of copy paste of what was happening in the Assemblée Nationale. So it's basically just French politics, being copied onto European politics. But I still think that there is, I used to cover the European Parliament, basically exclusively, and so this might be that side of me talking, but I do think that in the Commission there is a sort of, lack of understanding of the Parliament, and and I think it comes from the top. I mean, I don't think that, Bjorn Seibert and Ursula von der Leyen are necessarily the biggest fans of the Parliament. There were European Commission presidents in the past who were much more sort of parliamentary animals, who enjoyed the kind of rough and tumble of parliamentary politics. They'd been prime ministers, they'd dealt with, parliamentarians and the importance of debate and getting stuck in there. But I think that the Commission kind of, ignores that at its peril, and I still don't think they've actually necessarily learnt from the near misses. I mean, they weren't really that near misses, because ultimately, they paid off the socialists, they paid off the liberals, that everybody got a kind of, a sort of comms, bonanza, that they could say that they won, certain small things from the MFF or whatever it was. Ultimately, there was never really any risk, but the real risk is if this sense of, slightly, looking down at the Parliament, if that continues, with the amount of anger and frustration there is among the socialists, who are still the second largest force in the Parliament, that could easily backfire. And if the socialists are put in a corner to such an extent by the fact that there is this repeated, right to far right coalition, all it takes is, for them to put forward a motion of no confidence, which would be a huge step. And then we could be in seriously dicey waters because, the far right, I'm sure, would have the socialists have a lot of compunction about voting for far right amendments. That's the excuse, at least they gave themselves for not taking down the commission when they had the chance. But I seriously doubt that the far right would say, oh, we wouldn't vote with the socialists to take down the commission. I mean, this is exactly what their strategy is, to force a wedge between the socialists and the centre-right and to make the socialists feel so uncomfortable that they basically bring the whole thing crumbling down.
So, go ahead.
One thing, because it's quite interesting what you said. We have seen these 3 votes on the no confidence vote, and one thing that someone told me last week, which I keep thinking about, is the fact that it only takes. So we recently found out that it only takes 72 signatures to table this no confidence votes. These are rules of procedure that this person pointed out. These are rules of procedure that were made when S&D and EPP were the 2. Of course, they're still the 2 biggest groups, but like the far right was not as strong as it is right now, and the far left was not also, because they increased in people and they have more people in their ranks. So the thing is, like, they just learned how to play the game, the rules that they were there in place when this was not the situation, and that's how we've seen these 3 votes that were all tabled by the far left and the far right.
So a key figure in all of this, Eddy, is Manfred Weber, somebody we've written quite a lot about recently as head of the EPP and head of the group in Parliament. What is his relationship with von der Leyen, how the two interact, and how would you describe his relationship with Metsola? Because there is this kind of important trio there collaborating with one another. They're nominally allies, but they're also rivals in some sense.
Yeah, it's an interesting hat trick of people. I mean, I think if you had to make a food chain, you would do it in that way. I mean, you'd say von der Leyen undisputedly, is in charge. But of course, she in part does rely on Weber, right? Weber, is you can say many things about him and his double salary, etc., as we've written about. But you can also, give him credit that he does, wield his role in the parliament independently from any national government. And I think many people would argue that that's healthy for the parliament. So he's independent of von der Leyen, and to what extent is Metsola independent of either of them? I mean, that's really the question, because when Metsola became, president of the parliament, she's young, she's from a very small member state, she's from Malta. It was seen as quite surprising, especially as it came hot on the heels of Weber being passed over for commission president, and everybody thought, naturally he would be president of the parliament as a kind of recompense. So there is a sense there that, Metsola got the job in part, although she is a shrewd politician, because Weber didn't want it, and therefore, what deals have they made, in private, in the kind of corridors of the parliament, dating back years. I mean, we were the first in Rapporteur to report that, Roberta Metsola is looking for a third term. Nothing that has come out since then has disproven that. In fact, it's strengthening that reporting. So you can see that for Weber, I think it's useful to have Metsola there. She's a strong parliament president, but she's also someone who is certainly seen as how do I put this? I mean, she's someone who is liked on the far right. Whether how explicit she's looking for that support is another question. But she, like Weber, is someone who's playing this kind of double game. Although of course she has the whole cloak of institutional responsibilities to hang over herself and say, well, of course I have to talk to these crazy people over here. Of course I have to talk to these crazy people over there. That's my job. I represent the parliament, and that is true. So many things are true at the same time. I think. Last thing I'll say, like Weber, there was a very crucial period, basically in 2024, end of 2023, where Weber was really causing von der Leyen like huge headaches, because he was basically, and he saw this early, he saw this sort of right-wing, far-right wave coming, and he was sort of steering the boat in a different direction to von der Leyen on migration. There were these votes about funding like fences and things like that from the EU budget, which was sort of, caused huge amounts of outcry. There was the nature restoration vote. So he saw this thing coming, and he sort of moved the ship in a certain direction. But I think that period of outright tension is kind of over, because Weber kind of got what he wanted. He got von der Leyen to stand on a manifesto, which for example, in 2024 he got her to run as a Spitzenkandidat. For example, he got her to say that she wanted Frontex to be tripled to 30,000 officers on the borders of Europe, and all sorts of other things. So I think from his point of view, he's done pretty well for himself, financially as well, I'd say.
Nicoletta, Eddy avoided discussing von der Leyen and his views of her. So I'm going to come to you on that. What is your impression of her reputation? This is her second term, obviously. She's taken, some would say, a 180-degree turn from where she was just a couple of years ago in terms of the Green Deal and in terms of her entire agenda. That was really the centerpiece of her last agenda. That said, as we've discussed, she's been faced with a lot of unexpected realities over the last year, chiefly with Donald Trump. The trade deal that she agreed with him has been criticized by many people. I think the polling data also reflected that. But she is in a bind. She's between the member states on the one hand and the parliament, and then she's got to deal with Donald Trump as well. What is your sense of her? She doesn't give a lot of interviews, or really any interviews, so we don't see her publicly very much. What is sort of the word on the street about how she's doing so far?
Second mandate has been so far. Well, from the parliament perspective or from the member states perspective?
Both.
Well, I think at the council level, which is where I think sometimes I understand more the council than I understand the parliament, I have to say. At the council level, I think member states are quite happy about the new proposals and how this situation has been evolving, because she's been doing what they've been asking her to do. With the omnibuses, we have been seeing with the environmental legislation, with the digital legislation, with migration, as well with defense as well. At the same time, she has to respond to the parliament as well, and the parliament has not been very happy about her. We've seen the 3 votes of no confidence, and then when she comes to the parliament, she's not able to reply to their questions, and when we have these votes of no confidence, she makes her own speech and then she refuses to reply, which is something that people do see and do talk about it. So in that way, I think there is a bit of difference between the two institutions in how they relate to the Commission and what the Commission has been doing. But of course, from the left side, MEPs are not happy about her. They think that this mandate is basically just dismantling what she's been doing in the first one. And of course, like at the same time, we have the council that is really happy, and then that also creates tensions between the council and the parliament, that in the end they will have to agree on the legislation. So it's definitely creating more tension between left and right, between parliament and council, and we will be seeing in the trilogues, we will be seeing when these new pieces of legislation will have to be finally approved. But maybe you want to add something on
Yeah,
that?
I think, I'm not a historian of the EU, and I never would like to be one. But I think that second-term Commission presidents are often weaker, right? They've often had to get across the line to get that second term. They've had to make more promises to the European Council. One thing that's rarely pointed out is that the European Commission president is a member of the European Council. So she works incredibly closely with countries. She had a terrible year. She's had a terrible year as Commission president. That's just without doubt. She's had a lot of communications hiccups. Her sort of perfectly made public image, which she crafted for 5 years and was extremely popular, from the vaccines to supporting Ukraine so staunchly, to being the sort of face of the Green Deal. All these kind of positive news stories has kind of crumbled away, and I think she does have to take some responsibility for that. She has. Created a commission. She inherited obviously the commission that she inherited, but she's now had 6 years to rebuild the institution and her image. You have a very strong kind of communications wing, which is extremely tightly run and very efficient. A lot of it is about communicating what she is doing. You see the other commissioners a lot less. The commissioners that she picked, and she had an unprecedented role in picking the commissioners compared to previous commission presidents. She set out these gender rules, and she rejected people. I mean, her own selection process was a lot tougher and more stringent than the Parliament's selection process for the commissioners, which is actually where the selections are meant to be. So she's built this commission in her image, and I think she's fragilized. That's a French word. She's become more fragile. I've become more French. I'm now making errors in different languages, not just English. And yeah, I think what was I going to say? I've lost my train of thought. But I think that she's made a lot of more promises to the council, to the countries, and it's come in a year where she wanted to make a geopolitical commission. Well, you've got a geopolitical commission, and where is it?
That was the promise of the
Exactly.
first commission, and now I think the geopolitics have really come to her in a big way, maybe more so than she realized when she came up with that slogan. It was a good slogan, but be careful what you wish for. I think one of the big criticisms that I hear of this commission is that they are looking outward too much. This is a related point. They're not doing enough to fine-tune, advance the single market, for example, to do the things that the European Commission was really established to do, that they're too caught up in all of these other ancillary issues. And if you listen to her State of the Union address, she was talking about an affordable electric vehicle and what role Europe could play there. Somebody said it could be a European Trabant, possibly. The housing crisis. These are all important issues, but have not traditionally been the purview of the European Commission. Do you think, and what do people internally say about this remit? Are they trying to do too much? Because you hear, and we've written about this, they're very good at coming up with slogans. They must have or maybe it's ChatGPT. They come up with new slogans every week for some initiative, and then you never hear anything about it anymore.
She's got a few problems. I mean, first of all, she's basically been banned, or she's banned herself from presenting actual legislation, because there was a sense there was this frenzy of legislation. So okay, we've got to calm down on the legislation. So that ties her hands to everything's about simplification. Every new law has to have these sort of spurious targets built into it about how much administrative burden calculated in euros is going to be saved from which is all kind of slightly a bit like that. So that's difficult, because ultimately, what is the commission? It's a legislation machine. So if you're running a commission where you're saying we're going to slow down on legislation, you're already kind of weakening yourself to a certain extent. She's also trying to grab competences from other areas that traditionally belonged more to the council or to NATO. I mean, this whole advance into defense and this kind of stuff. Okay, they're staying in the world of joint procurement so far, but there's also been questions about the European Defence Agency, who should lead that, tensions with Kaja Kallas. So, there is, and she's communicating on these topics. I mean, there was this whole discussion, which seems like, sadly, it seems like millions of years ago now, but there was this whole discussion about the security guarantees for Ukraine, which, at the time we said this is they're getting ahead of themselves, but stationing troops in Ukraine. I mean, she got slapped down by the German government for talking about this, and they sort of reminded her that you are the European Commission president, you're not the head of NATO. Rutte was, she has no troops. So she's and then at the same time, the commission is not. It's a huge bureaucratic machine. Same for any other bureaucracy that has 32,000 people working for it. So it's not, and I think she's had some difficulties, in terms of getting that machine ticking over. I was talking to one very highly placed person today who was sort of saying, I don't think the commission should get, someone inside the commission, very high up, that's doubting that the commission should get more competencies until they've kind of worked out how the pipeline can work more smoothly. So, she's kind of trying to do many different things at the same time. And if you have less legislation at a time of extremely tight fiscal environment where governments don't want to spend more, and also a rising far right, where even the centre right are kind of taking up the sort of Brussels bashing. Donald Tusk is often talking about red tape and we need to cut back. And the Commission has allowed this narrative that about slashing red tape to kind of multiply. And how conducive is that to the Commission's own work? Isn't she just laying traps for future Commission presidents who actually might want to legislate?
Well, we'll see. I do want to come to your questions, so I hope there's some good questions out there. I think we have a a microphone to pass around. But before we do that, I wanted to ask you both about the reparations loan. This is the big story in Brussels this week. We haven't really talked about Ukraine in detail. Ukraine is basically on the brink of financial collapse if it doesn't get this money. A lot of people in Europe are coveting these reserves that are parked here in Belgium with Euroclear. The Belgians are resisting that. Don't they have a point, though, Eddy? I mean, isn't this their right to say we don't want to do something that's going to put us in such financial jeopardy?
Yeah, they do have a right, and in some ways the ball is now. I mean, the ball is entirely in the court of the Commission. One could argue that they have to come up with a scheme that is legally viable and will not, destroy the eurozone or all the other things that the Belgians are saying. The most, and we today in Rapporteur we had an interview with the guy who invented the idea. The idea of the reparations loan. His scheme works slightly differently, and actually he says his idea, which would be to kind of take the account literally out of Belgium and find somewhere else to put these, immobilized assets. He says that would work better because it would mean that Belgium would have its hands clean and wouldn't have to worry about this. But it's turning into quite a nasty political sort of slugfest at the moment. And I think Bart de Wever probably is, we now see 2 months on, we kind of see de Wever as being isolated. He probably felt that way 2 months ago when in October in Copenhagen, when this idea was kind of being foisted upon him. And we're hearing that that the proposal might be put before the ambassadors on Wednesday. It kind of feels now that the political dynamics are that the Commission is just going to go ahead with it and not wait for Belgium to change its mind. I mean, the letter from Friday that Bart de Wever sent that we wrote about in Rapporteur, that's not a letter from a guy who's about to change his mind.
Well, he is Flemish, after all. Yeah. Do you think that the Belgians can hold their ground, Nicoletta, if they say, well, look, we're not going to do this?
Well, they seem quite convinced, and we saw it already last month at the UCO level, and I mean, the fight is just postponed to the 18th, when we will have the leaders meeting, and we will see. And then, of course, we've been hearing about it quite a bit. This week is the week in which the Commission will have to put forward this proposal. And the problem is that what we were talking about last month is that maybe the EU has, that was an overreach. And that just, I think what we said is like, it meets Belgian reality. There are concerns, there are serious concerns from Belgium about this. And now it's up to the Commission to propose something that is legally viable and that is not confiscation, because that's also the problem. And but what people has been saying is that this proposal is there, is already written. It's just a matter of like, finding the moment, the right moment to propose it, and that is political. And of course, it's really difficult when we have the letter from last week, and it's so strong, and Bart de Wever is really pushing this. To have that moment to finally propose it and wonder, is this going to fly? And I think that's the question everyone has been asking themselves. But that is up for the UCO Council in the 18th. So that's definitely what we're looking at.
So that council meeting just before Christmas will be a real nail biter.
And apparently could last for 3 days. That's what we're.
It's like a
hearing.
Netflix series.
It could be 2 days or 3 days.
Okay, I would like to go to your questions. Don't be shy. We've got one here, the bearded gentleman on the left. It's a familiar face.
Thank you. Thank you. I've been working on my beard. So I have 2 questions actually, but I'll make them very short, so to spare you. The first of all, quite a bit of negativity tonight. There's lots of focus on what the Commission's been doing wrong. So my first question is the Commission doing anything right, or is anything going right for this Commission? The second question is, you focused on the world as is and the situation as is. I think we should also look to the world as it will be. The polling as it stands at the moment shows that in 2029 we might very well have a right-wing so-called Venezuela parliament. We might have a right-wing so-called Venezuela council, which means, of course, a right-wing so-called Venezuela Commission president in 2029. What's your view on what will happen in 2029? Thank you.
We can take maybe more.
Yeah, we'll take one more, and then we'll.
Thank you very much. I would also like to ask a question in regards with the Commission. As an MEP, I can mirror the feeling that many people in the European Parliament are unsatisfied, and we heard a lot about the big things like the vote of no confidence, but when you were talking about the shift between the EPP and the far right, you mentioned that also the small things matter, and I have the impression that we are, as a Parliament, we are more and more frustrated with the way that the Commission includes the Parliament in the proceedings. Just look at the West Sahara vote, where we nearly didn't agree with the Commission just because they didn't ask us before, so to say. There was a lot of talking about that, just blocking that to teach them a lesson. So would you agree with me in that observation that that my fellow MEPs, as well as I, we are also losing our patience on the smaller level with the way that the Commission is working together with the Parliament?
Okay. Maybe we'll start with that one because it's an interesting question. I mean, it does seem even over the past months that the dynamic between the Parliament and the Commission has become much more confrontational, and I have to say more interesting for us journalists here. But the two of you are on the front lines. What is your impression?
Well, we have seen, and Nicoletta, correct me when I get this wrong, but it was over the safe loans that the Parliament sued the council, right? So it's council/commission.
Over the article on which they proposed.
Yeah, exactly. So we are maybe entering a period of more sort of institutional rivalry, which obviously we love as Brussels-based journalists. And then there was also a move over a patent law last week that the Parliament decided to sue the Commission. So having said that, I don't think we're going to go back to the sort of Martin Schulz era where we have these big kind of dinosaur figures beating their chests in the Parliament, the Verhofstadts calling for more powers. I mean, I don't think we're in that kind of era anymore. So I don't think people should be fooled when they see that there's an interinstitutional court case. I think that ultimately the glue that binds everything together in this city these days is the European People's Party, and it may be that there's a 4-year court case coming up between two institutions, but really the politics of it is gone by the time the news is written. So maybe Metsola has to do. This is my cynical view, but maybe Metsola has to. Yeah, I mean, she has to listen to the MEPs if there's a decision that they want to sue the Parliament, that they want to sue the Council or the Commission rather. She goes along with that, but I don't think that we don't think we necessarily have a from an institutional point of view. Obviously, we have motions of no confidence, but we don't have a kind of adversarial necessarily relationship because I just simply don't think that an EPP-led Parliament would have any appetite to take on an extremely EPP-led commission. Right.
Good point. We also have the question about what's going right so far for the Commission. You mentioned the safe loans at the outset, but
but we forgot to mention that they completely excluded the Parliament from that. So
yes, well they did, but there's still progress, I think, in the eyes of many people.
And they sued the Council and not the Commission. Yeah. So that's
what's going right?
Well, that's a really hard question. Maybe I'm not the best person to answer. What's going right?
I mean, have they delivered on what they ultimately they have?
I think it's too early to say.
Some would say migration is going on.
I do think it's too early to say because we've been seeing all these proposals. Just very few of them, went into trilogues and they finished up their process. So it's really, I mean, it's just 1 year. Like we will take into account everything at the end of the term. I think it's too early to say what the Commission has been doing right. We can only talk about the last term. For now, we can only talk about the proposal that would put forward, and in that I feel it's a bit too early to say.
I think not to contradict you, Nicoletta, and I never do.
Go ahead.
On trade policy, I think you have to give the Commission some credit because with their backs up against the wall, I mean, I don't give them credit on the US deal. That was a complete disaster, but since then, there has been progress on very tricky trade deals. On India, I mean, that would be it looks like now the latest reporting from our colleagues on the agriculture team, Sophia, is that it's not going particularly well, and of course there's going to be bumps. But if the EU manages to close a deal with India, it would be huge. It would be a huge geopolitical success. I mean, they've closed one with Indonesia. Of course, we mentioned this council on the 18th of December. 2 days later, the expectation, the hope is that the EU will sign a deal with Mercosur. So if the year ends, and it might not happen at all, but if the year ends with a deal with Indonesia, which is a huge country, with with India and with Mercosur, Maros Sefcovic, who we also interviewed in Rapporteur a couple of months ago, can be said to have had a good year in the context of a very difficult trade negotiation with the US.
I agree with that, but I would also say what has gone right for many people in business and in politics across Europe is that the Commission has, heard the message that they've been sending, that many of these initiatives of the past years, particularly the Green Deal, went too far and they're reversing course. Many people disagree with that, and one could also question, well, given that this was the centerpiece of the last Commission, why are they doing this now? But I think for many people in Europe, this is progress because the European economy is stagnating as a whole. It needs a boost of oxygen, if not steroids to the heart to get it really going again. So I think for the business community, at least, that is seen as a positive sign. I think the U.S. trade deal is a mixed bag. 15% is obviously not very good if you have to pay the 15%, but it could have been a lot worse. And I think the realities that von der Leyen was dealing with there, involving Ukraine and the sort of Damocles that was hanging over her head with Trump pulling support away from Ukraine, or at least threatening to, should also be considered there. And in terms of 2029, I think a lot depends on what happens in the United States. If MAGA continues, if J.D. Vance becomes the next president, or if Donald Trump remains president, I think that the European reality is going to get much more complicated. And you'll see more attempts by China and others around the world and the United States to kind of divide and rule Europe, which has proved to be unfortunately much easier than many of us would like. But that does seem to be the direction of travel. Although there again, the Netherlands has given us some hope on that front. They didn't re-elect Wilders, although it was quite close in the end. And it does seem more likely, looking at the polls and looking at the example of Meloni, who has moderated a little bit. This seems to be what most people are sort of anticipating also in France, with Le Pen or Bardella looking inevitable at this stage. And the expectation, as you know, is that they will also, at least on the surface, moderate to some degree. But maybe you have
I agree with that, but I think that I think in the next couple of years, we have elections. The next big European elections are Sweden, Finland, and in those countries, the centre left, may well win. I mean, in Sweden, it looks very, very, very certain that they will win. In Finland, a little bit less certain. But the socialists are having a terrible time at the moment. Sanchez is kind of mired in corruption scandals and very much focused on domestic politics at home. And Mette Frederiksen is not your typical socialist with her massive focus on immigration, and also very much signing up to the sort of slashing red tape agenda, which the kind of classic socialists are a little bit more wary of, to say the least. So, but if in the next couple of years they can add to like 1-2 more governments, that will actually strengthen their hands. So we might get to a position in 2029. It's a big might, but we might get to that position where it's actually a bit more equal between the two largest parties than it is now.
Thank you for that. Thank you for your questions. We're a little bit over, but it was a very useful discussion, I think, for us. It's always good to interact with our readers. We do have some drinks ready out here and something to eat, and don't be shy about asking us questions afterwards, and writing us, complaining, whatever is on your mind. We're open to all kinds of feedback. even abuse, which I'm particularly used to. So thank you all again for coming. Thank you to Polling Europe for partnering with us on this event and for the interesting data they provided. And hope to see you soon on Rapporteur. Bye-bye.